Okay, so we'll kind of shift gears and get into this. Doug and I talked about potential topics that would be useful, one of which was all my failures and shortcomings from scaling, so we double dipped. You got that earlier this week. And then another was turning leads into sales, because it seems like it's gotten to be a little bit more challenging to get people on the phone, to get people to convert, to get people to engage. And I think that's natural. I think that's a common thing. Anytime something gets more saturated, the responsiveness gets low. When it's novel, it's easier to get people to respond. It's kind of like a super signature was way more effective when I started using it than it would be now, because so many people have kind of got on that train. So how do we stay ahead of the curve? How do we continue to make sure that we're getting a good ROI on the leads that we're generating? Quick question, how many of you use BJ to run ads? So I think BJ kind of, I don't know that he thinks of it, I'm sure he doesn't think of it the way that I'm going to describe it, but I think part of the reason that he's more effective than most agency type people is he leans into some of the things that we're talking about, or we will talk about. Because really, we all want the same thing. We want to be able to turn the people we come in contact with into more conversations, consultations, guests, trials. And, so if that's the objective, there are layers to it too, right? We want to increase the speed to conversion, not just, oh, wait a minute, I spent this money in January, they converted in November, so they did convert. Well, still, that's a cash flow thing, right? You want to recoup that investment faster. We want to leverage the things that we do well, I think. I've talked about that for as long as I can remember. Play to your strengths, leverage what you do well. But also, we want to do it in a way that is prospect or client friendly or beneficial, not just, oh, I'm doing the stuff that I like to do. Because you'll hear people say, well, I want to play to my strengths, and really they default to assuming that the prospect who is uneducated, uninformed in what we do, the inner workings, how we're different, how we're better, we assume they just connect the dots and figure it out. So I think there's a way for us to be better at transplanting the things that we do well into the minds of the clients, for lack of a better way of putting it. So the reality, if we look at this from a distance, and this is kind of how I try to look at most things when it comes to business or marketing or whatever else, is that clients must, I'm going to use the word brand and branding a lot just for the purposes of this conversation. This has nothing to do with colors or fonts or anything like that, right? I did a course, the first program I did after I sold my stake in the old holding company was the branding and conversion system. And it talked about some of this stuff then. Now, obviously, my thinking on it's evolved a great deal since, but I believe that people have to be brand aware before they're going to make some sort of commitment with you, financial commitment, time commitment. They may use some discovery time. They may be curious, but to actually make an ongoing commitment, they have to be brand aware. Now, this can happen in multiple ways. The three most common that I think happen are by reputation, right? Like, you can choose an airline based on reputation. If like, hey, you know what? We know of Delta, it's been around forever, or whatever else, maybe that's how you pick. You can choose a brand of car based on reputation. There are a lot of things that I think reputation carries a lot of weight. If somebody's been in the market for a long time, there's safety, there's security, there's trust in that, right? So in other words, there's like risk mitigation. So the second thing is you can create brand awareness and build trust through content that you distribute. People can watch videos of what you do. They can join workshops online, offline. They can read emails. They can listen to podcasts. And we'll talk a lot about that today because I think that that's an opportunity still a lot of people miss. And then they can gain brand, like they can reach this level of brand comfort by just experiencing what you do. That's why we talk about get them through the door so often. That's why, like, that's just another way of saying what business owners say to us very regularly. Well, if we can just get them through the door, then they stay. Well, that's an experiential way to gain trust with your brand. And any of those three, or ideally a combination of those three, work. But I think a lot of things that we do almost kind of like ignore that in our industry, in a lot of industries. I mean, we talked with a private client Doug and I work with who they were using an ad agency. The ad agency was just running stock photos, had the same subject line or headline and text as everybody else. And I'm like, so if you're different, you've spent money to basically say you're the same. That's the way that I look at this. If you're not using your resources to express how you are different, how you're better, then you're not gaining ground with the prospect. You're not building any sort of brand trust because they don't know. Like, if you were to go ask the random person in our neighborhood, tell me the difference between Orange Theory, Burn Boot Camp, F45, CrossFit Bluegrass, which is up the street too. They don't know, right? And they got plenty of other things to worry about. They don't need to be an expert in that. Now, if I own any of those, I'm going to be able to articulate to you why we think we're different, why we think we're better, how our stuff's different than the next guy down the road, how our coaches are more qualified, whatever. It's on us, it's our responsibility and obligation to translate that to things that the consumer understands. So why do I think branding is a growing part of our path to conversions? Well, the first thing I'd tell you is kind of what I think I just made a segue into. There are more options than there have ever been. When I got into this industry, there were 0 franchised group training options. There were 2 franchised personal training businesses, and only one of them had any traction at all, Fitness Together. There were far fewer non-big box gyms. I was Anytime Fitness franchisee number 33, right? Now there are 4,000 of them. So, all the little spin-offs of that, there just wasn't much in the way of options. There were far fewer people at the time. I believe as of 2007, about 13% of the people in the United States had a gym membership or a fitness membership of some sort. I mean, that number is about 2.5 times greater now. So there's a whole lot more out there. There's a whole lot more market saturation. So we have to work harder to gain somebody's attention and differentiate ourselves. I think that there's a bit of a trust deficit too. I think that there's a lot of bait and switch. There's a lot of people that have had negative experiences going in and being hard sold something, promised, oh, it's a free blank, when really all it was let me get you through the door, lock you in the office, and hit you over the head with a price sheet till you submit. And there's not an experiential component of things. Like there's just so much that we have to understand, like we may have to overcome because we're not just existing with this person in a vacuum, right? Like this prospect. We are navigating all the other things that they've dealt with, all the other things they've heard. So they should probably have a trust deficit in some cases because we know that a lot of people in our industry, and this is not unique to our industry, but it's important for us, they're not great at treating people well. And, you know, it may not be our fault, but it's our problem. And then I think there's content overload, or maybe the inverse way of looking at it, there's fragmented attention. There's more stuff being pushed on people than ever before. And there are reels being crammed down their throat in their social media feed. There are constant posts with the easy access to Chat GPT, people who never created content before creating a bunch of bland content. But it's just busy. There's just so much stuff that if you don't work hard to differentiate, it's harder to get somebody's attention and retain it. So you have to do a better job, I think. And then finally, I think the path to conversions is slower, even if you're good at it. It's slower than it would have been, let's say, 2018, 2019, maybe even a couple years ago for you guys, because it's harder to get somebody to engage in a conversation. It's not as novel to send somebody a text message as it used to be, so it's harder to get a response. It's not as novel to send an engagement email, so it's harder to get a response. It's infinitely harder to get somebody to pick up the phone. So, you have a slower path to conversion. So this is why I think branding should be an important part of your conversion strategy. It shouldn't just be, hey, we're just going to pound them with different formats of saying, get on the phone. Come in for a session. We have to do some other things. So I think there's something to be said if we look at how people gain interest, allegiance, buy into somebody. I think the way people consume content they like is a good clue. So how many of you have binged a podcast at some point? Like a series of podcasts in the course of a week or something like that. You're like, hey, I like this. I'm going to listen to the next one. I'm going to listen to the next one. Yes, no, maybe. Yes. How many of you have binged a series on something like Netflix? Yep. That was not how content was available to us years ago, right? Like, if you wanted to listen to a radio show, you listened to the radio show at the interval that they played it if you were in the car, right? Holly will listen to a crime show or something, but she won't just try to find it on the radio. Like, it's like, hey, I'm just going to forward to this episode and this episode and this episode. I mean, Netflix is the same way. There's a power in meeting people where they are and creating bingeable stuff that's relevant to them. So I think we can learn from that because that's how people operate. They want things when they want them. So the idea that everything always has to be spaced out in a certain fashion, like we want to win people over the same way their favorite podcast win them over, the same way their favorite TV shows or series win them over. And so there was a guy that definitely influenced my way of thinking on this, a guy that was in my boardroom group when I was in a mastermind that he was a pretty sharp guy. He had gotten one real estate company to 10 figures. He is now the CEO of another publicly traded real estate company. And he approaches it a little bit differently because he's very much the face of a lot of this stuff. He does a lot of content. And he had gone back and had his team look at, like, what were the prerequisites to people buying. And the thing that they came up with, and again, this is what he said, so I'm going to try to make it practical, was on average they consumed 47 minutes of their content before they bought. And that was like a minute per page of reading or 47 minutes of video or podcasts. And I thought that was pretty important because if I reverse engineer how I've bought things, if I reverse engineer how relationships with people that I've connected with that move forward really kind of evolved, I think there's truth to it. I don't know that there's magic in the number 47 here as much as people, like, they need to buy in. And so that's why more people, once they come into your gym, that's a different level of relationship and buy-in than reading a text email that you got from Ken Berger, right? That's also a different level of buy-in than connecting with you on a Zoom, even, because it's interactive, right? So I think the important piece here is, how do we get people to, for lack of a better term, consume more of us? So engage with more of what we do faster. And part of that's just your brand has to be really relevant to them. If it's generic, if it's general, they don't consume it as much. And the more specialized you get, the better off I think you are. So the nice thing about this being binge-worthy is there are a lot of things that we've probably created that we could kind of put together and share with people in a condensed time frame, like a sequence. And I'll give you a good example. I asked Paul the other day, I'm like, create playlists of my podcast about topics. Like, if you're interested in systems, then the way I record podcasts is very random. It's like, I'll talk about this thing, and then that thing, and then that thing, and there's no like sequential order to it. But if you're interested in this one thing, let's aggregate all of those in one spot, and then, oh, you want systems? Hey, here's a playlist for all of our systems podcasts, or our most popular systems podcast, for you to consume. If they consume them, then one of two things is going to happen. They're going to say, he sucks, this isn't for me, and they're going to ignore me, and I don't have to waste any more time in that interaction. That's fine. Or they're going to say, hey, I'm in. I like this. I like what I hear. Let's move to the next step. It's not random. It's not arbitrary. It's not hopefully they stumbled across something. And if you look at what, like, historically, like, the guy that really made the launch stuff very popular, a guy named Jeff Walker, had Product Launch Formula. They've been out for, at this point, probably 15 years. I mean, that's kind of what Product Launch Formula is, too, in some ways. It's like, we're going to give you a lot of specific information to you leading up to asking you for a purchase. And it's just organizing the way that we're sharing things in a more persuasive fashion and understanding that, like, how people actually engage with the things that we do. So So I think that's one big piece of this, and I'll get into a little bit more, but I want to shift gears. This isn't just about creating content. This is also the second piece of branding conversion that I think is important is incentivizing engagement a little bit more than we do. I think that if you want people to engage with you, it should be a little bit more about what's in it for them than it often is. A lot of times, we ask people like, hey, let's do a consultation. Well, consultation is really just code for saying, let's get into some sales environment so I can sell you something. There's no benefit to you coming, right? So if somebody says, well, I get a lot of no-shows, well, there was no bait to get me there. There's no win for me to be there unless I know I'm ready to buy. If I know I'm ready to buy, then sure I can come. But if I'm on the fence, then I'm like, well, I don't know if I'm ready to decide right now. So why not just kick the can down the road? So what can we do for incentivized engagement? I'm going to give you a few examples here, and obviously I'll share the doc with you a little bit later, but you guys actually look at me a little bit more if I don't share it with you till later. So we can customize the general stuff to make it more valuable. So one example is a simple call to customize. Like let's say that you wanted to kind of model, Luke's done really well with workshops. Let's say you wanted to do an online workshop. Well, here, I'll give you an even more specific example. Holly started to do a lot of stuff with like menopausal women. Let's say she did a workshop for menopausal women online, a Zoom. And then at the end, she just said, hey, by the way, I covered a lot of ground here. Not everything applies to everybody, and each person has their own unique circumstances. So I've set aside some time to do 20-minute one-on-one calls with you to customize what we talked about to you, your needs, and your goals. And then just ask them to get on a call, right? So now it's about them. It is about what's in it for you to customize the general to you and your unique circumstances. So we've taken what would normally be just, hey, you consume this stuff, now let me get you on the phone to sell you something, to, hey, let's do something that makes this more valuable to you. I want to help you even more.
Would that be a free offer, that 20-minute conference?
Yeah, 100%. Right? So I think that's an easy way to incentivize engagement. Anything that we're doing where we're giving somebody personalization instead of general information is a pretty strong incentive because everybody thinks they're some unique snowflake, right? Like that general doesn't work for them, and that's fine. Like, agree, disagree with it, that's reality. So we have to use that to say, okay, how do we get you to engage? The second incentive, and Levi, I stole this from you, the double your trial, like the double your trial is perfect, right? It's, okay, you say, I'm interested in this thing. Well, if you use this now, we'll make this thing twice as valuable. Well, that's a pretty powerful incentive to get you to engage, to improve the speed of conversion. What things can we do this anyway, like the Godfather offers to get people to convert, all this stuff. You don't have to wait till it's time for somebody to buy to start incentivizing them to move through the pipeline. Really, if we're thinking about this relationship, we're going from invisible and unaware that each other exist. So, I just told Levi about a different gym that's in our market that's pretty cool because he goes and trains at the same gym when he comes here. I'm like, hey, you should check out this other one sometime. It was invisible to him. He was invisible to it prior to that. That's a lot of our businesses, right? So that's stage one. Now there's visible. We are aware each other exists. Now we start to know, more of the stuff. Like, can they help me? Is this a good fit? Well, if we think about this relationship continuum, we don't need to just use an incentive here at the end to get somebody to buy. I want to incentivize them along the way to get them to take the next step, because we know that with every step forward they take, and the obvious one is to get them through our door, with every step forward they take, the probability that they become a client and the speed at which they convert to becoming a client increases. So incentive to move to the next step, that's the most obvious, like straightforward one I know is, hey, we offer 2 free one-on-one sessions. Well, if you use them in the next 7 days, we'll give you 4. If, we offer a 14-day trial, we'll give you a 28-day trial. Whatever gets them to do it. And then also, if you go back and read things like Predictably Irrational or any of this stuff, they'll talk about, like, people reinforce their own decisions. Talk about political yard signs. If you ask somebody, hey, go put this giant sign in your front yard, the default answer is no. Almost everybody says no. But then if you go to people and say, put this little yard sign, then you come back a week later and say, hey, would you trade the little one for a big one? A much higher percentage of people say yes, because they're just validating the previous decision. They're building on that. Well, if I've already said I'm interested in coming in the gym, and you're giving me a bonus for coming in the gym sooner, it's an easier sell. In fact, it's a stronger sell than if you gave me the 28-day from the get-go and said, but you have to use it earlier, because you're already just validating your own decision. All right, so another simple way to do this, and this is similar to the one-on-one call, but this, I think, is a way to engage people if you're doing things like via email or whatever else. Like, let's say you use a survey or a sorting type of question in your email series. So it's like, hey, are you more interested in this or this? Are you more interested in weight loss or getting stronger or whatever? And then the next question is, well, what are you doing now, or what obstacles have you faced? But you can go back and forth in that type of dialogue. Well, an easy transition is personal, like just offering personal help. By the way, if you're open to it, I've got a couple ideas that might help. Want to hop on a quick call? I'll tell you that the most effective language I've ever personally used to do this was saying, hey, I was thinking about blank. I was thinking about the problem that you told me you had yesterday, and I came up with a couple ideas. Would you want to get on the phone and let me share them with you? Because now it's already like, oh, wait a minute. This person's already invested some time in me. I was thinking about you and your stuff. So there's some reciprocity there too. So if you can weave that kind of personal attention in, but also imply that, like, hey, I put some time into you and you weren't even here, then there's that reciprocity component to get people to engage. And that's really easy to do if you've sent them something, or if you've elicited them, like, some sort of share with you that expressed something that's posed a problem, a desire to change, something they want to improve. Because it could be as simple as somebody fills out a form and Graham says, hey, you know what? I was reviewing your form and, it said that you need to get faster and you struggled with this issue. I was thinking about it and I've got a couple ideas with you, or for you. Would you want to hop on a call? Well, again, I've just said this is about you. I put a little bit of time into you. And that simple 3, 4, 5-word phrase kind of invokes this reciprocity. And people, like individuals aren't super predictable, but as a whole, we're kind of predictable. Like the whole reciprocity thing works. The whole incentive thing works, so taking advantage of that. And I've got a couple example, like I've got an example of like the multiple choice engagement post that can elicit that I'll share with you here. Giving out like a free game plan. BJ actually just had told me yesterday that one of the more popular ads he's seeing on like Instagram are people giving away free one-page game plans. Well, I'm like, well, okay, you can give away a game plan as a lead magnet, but then you turn around and say, okay, here's the game plan. If you'd be interested, I'll hop on, a 15-minute speed coaching session with you and customize the game plan to you. And so now we've taken a lead magnet and we've been very congruent and we've made it personal. The next incentive, we did this for a guy that was in Business Growth Sprint, and I thought this was an interesting twist for people that don't have a ton of capacity or may not even have a ton of lead flow. He was doing one-on-one, and he didn't love the idea. I mean, I still occasionally hear people say they don't like free, and then after I belittle them a little bit and tell them how stupid that is, I try to figure out a path forward with that. But what we came up with for him was putting a velvet rope in front of it saying, hey, we've got one opening for a guest this week, or 2 openings for guests this week. Now, we only have 2 because of how much time we put into each individual person. So, it's first come, first serve. If you reply, if you aren't one of the first 2, then we'll put you on the wait list. So creating some scarcity around something that's free, which most people don't really think about doing. They think about free means swing the doors wide open and take all comers. But you can always put a velvet rope around space. You can say, hey, we've got 1 spot for a guest for, one of our 2-week trials or whatever else. And that works great if you are private, semi-private, have capacity issues, want to fill up a time slot that is hard to fill up, say, hey, we've got 1 spot in our 2 p.m. session, right? So just creating a sense of scarcity around it. And then the last one, and I think Luke is kind of the billboard for this, low friction offers. Again, so many people want to fight this still, and it's, I guess, astounding to me from a logical perspective, but sometimes people are just willing to die on really stupid hills. It's like, just because you think it takes you 12 weeks to elicit the ultimate outcome for somebody doesn't mean that somebody needs to trust you with the next 12 weeks if they've never met you. So low friction starting points, a workshop, a 7-day thing, a 14-day thing, where you give somebody a quick win and build enough trust to earn more time. Again, the issue isn't, oh, I need people who are committed. I want people who are committed. Well, somebody may want to be committed. They just may not want to be committed to you because you haven't earned that yet. Well, the easiest way to earn it is spend a little bit of time with them and build trust. All right, so before I get into like the fundamentals of how we can actually do like things that we need to check before we worry about invoking all the branding, do we have any questions about anything I've covered yet? Easy enough. Way to go. All right, so yes, we need to do the branding stuff, but if you're not checking the fundamental boxes first, you got to start there. Like, better leads equal more guests. So going out, proactively getting leads, getting guests through the door. Like if you're not consistently and proactively generating leads, you need to do that first. And you need to be trying, have a process to get them through the door first before we sit there and say, oh, I need to have bingeable content or something. Set monthly targets for number of leads through the door. At least a year ago, maybe longer, Doug put together like 40 leads a month forever, like his blueprint that they use there. Set a target every month, review it every day, on track or off track, make adjustments accordingly to make sure you're getting people through the door. If you're not doing outbound calls, figure out a way to weave those in. Yes, they're not going to answer most of the time. Leave them a voicemail. Be a real human that has a real voice. Leave them a voicemail. But then you also have an excuse to text them or email and follow up, say, hey, I left you a voicemail. So we've got congruent touch points. I would tell you outbound calls, probably at least 5 in the first 2 weeks, which isn't a whole lot. You can do all the fancy double dial stuff and everything else, but I can tell you that'll, like everything else, that will eventually have diminishing returns because the market figures it out, right? Like, so calling and calling right back may work for a little while, but the point, even if it stops working, doesn't mean you don't need to make 5 phone calls in the first 14 days. Texts, 8 to 12 in the first 14 days. Emails, 8 to 12 in the first 14 days. So to me, those are like fundamentals for the leads that you get. Until you check those boxes, we don't need to layer on all this other stuff. And then make initial engagement and conversation easy. One of the things I do on my emails is just say, hey, most of the people who download blank are either A or B. Which one best describes you? Multiple choice stuff's always the easiest, right? Because you don't have to think. You've already given them the answer to the test. They just have to pick one. They literally have to answer back with a letter, A or B. But now you're a real person. It is a two-way conversation. You have the ability to interact, plus as an added bonus, they reply to your email so it improves deliverability. You can do the same thing with text messaging. I mean, at some level, texts now get unsubscribed to far more than they did before. So getting people to engage with your text and not just being sell, sell, sell via text is valuable. Now, you're going to have to read them, whether you're using automatic members or Nomly or whatever else. Like, you're going to have to treat it in a way that somebody else, like the person on the other side, doesn't want to feel like this is just a broadcast email. That's not what they prefer to use text for, right? Text is a conversation. Even if they use email for information, knowledge, education, whatever, and plenty of people do. I mean, I don't know how many of you pay attention to the popularity of newsletters that aggregate stuff, but that's really grown. The Hustle got sold for 9 figures. There are a number of these that get sold for big amounts of money because they have a big readership. People will use email for that. They don't use text for that. They use text to go back and forth. They use text for conversation. All right, so once you've hit those marks for the fundamentals, then we start to build the brand. And we try to position ourselves ideally as different and better in our market. So the strategy, I think, is we got to deliver value, create familiarity, and create opportunities for deeper engagement. The first step, figure out, I wrote about this in long ago. I used the word hot button in like a follow-up sequence, like an onboarding sequence. Figure out the most important 2, 3, 4 things to your clients. Problems they want to solve, outcomes they want to achieve. Take inventory of the stuff you already have so you don't always feel like you have to create new things. And if you've already got videos, if you've already got emails, whatever else, put them together in that bucket. If you're somebody who deals with clients with back pain, put all your back pain stuff together in one spot. And then assemble those in like short sequences. And these sequences, I think, are really kind of cool tools because you could put them together and send them out just in your, like an automated like sequence, right? People, depending on your email software, people could click a link if they're interested, or you could just reach out and say, hey, we put together some great stuff for people who are experiencing back pain. Would you like me to send it to you? And so it can be manual. We can ask people if they want it. We can automate it, and people self-select. Click this link and it'll add you, like add this tag basically, right? It'll add you to this series. Or we just send it to everybody and we just cycle through. We do the back pain one, we do the knee pain one, we do the shoulder pain one, and then rinse and repeat. But we want to alternate gives and asks. Your emails, your texts, whatever, they can't all be asks. They can't all be, hey, come in and see us. Hey, we got a new program starting in December. So we want to cycle back and forth. Give your best stuff away. Don't hold back. Don't think that, oh, I'm going to wait until somebody's through the door. And I know this is probably not an issue for the people here, but that, like, if you think about this from a consumer perspective, like, that's absurd. Like, it's absolutely stupid to hold back your best stuff because then you're saying, I want you to make your buying decision based on inferior stuff. I want you to get my C-level stuff but think I'm an expert. No, like, give away your best stuff. I like to think of it as, like, I mean, the best example I probably have is my 2 most popular lead magnets have been things that we sold. Like the Fitness Entrepreneur Handbook you could buy for $19.95, a hard copy on Amazon. And the sales page was 1,200 words with testimonials from all sorts of people. I sold that way harder than most people sell their core program. And it generated, I don't know, 20,000 leads. The other one, during the pandemic, we had the online coaching specialist certification, and I just gave it away. Now, selfishly, I'm like, well, people need to be able to do this or my market shrinks if they can't stay afloat. But we had sold it. We had sold tens of thousands of dollars worth of that and just gave it away. Neither of those things impaired my ability to sell somebody the next thing. If anything, it increased my ability to sell them the next thing because it was good and they liked what they saw, so they wanted more. Or they hated it and they said, well, I don't want to talk to them. Then I had to worry about them, right? Mix formats. And this admittedly is probably kind of challenging for me because I would default to writing most of the time, but that's not the format people would want to consume the most. Mix formats. Don't only send text emails. I mean, video, podcast, PDF, mix things up so people can engage with whatever their preferred format is. And I don't know that I would default to, like, now we do video podcasts. That's certainly not my favorite, but sorry, Paul. Because it requires more steps. It's not just, I can sit there and type. So, but if I'm in business, we can't just be about my preferences. Like, we got to put stuff out that people want. mix the types of content that you're putting out, social proof that demonstrates that you can help because they see other people like them that you've helped, education, and then persuasive stuff, like things that move people. We want time with our brand. Like, I know I said 47 minutes previously, but if somebody spends an hour with your brand, with your stuff, they're going to be far more informed to make an educated decision whether or not they're interested in working with you, right? I mean, think about that. Other than, oh, I just saw this ad, we're looking for 5 Middletown residents who blank, 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 and then a stock photo of people that don't look at all like them. Well, is that more persuasive? Or, hey, I learned all about Becky and her clients and everything else. I've spent an hour consuming this. I can make an informed decision then, right? That's different than this other stuff that I'm seeing. And then don't feel, and this is coming from somebody who sends a lot of emails, and at this point there have probably been 700 episodes of podcasts and everything else. Don't feel like you have to be on this like hamster wheel of content production. Produce some really good stuff, but then focus on consumption. How do I get people to actually consume it? Because for us, what is old hat, it's new to them. So we need more consumption, so put it out in different ways to get people to consume it. So I've got 4 questions and concerns that I think you want to address with this branding side of things. Number 1, do I like you? If I'm the consumer, do I like you? So you putting whoever they're going to engage with or whoever the face of the business is in this and not just making it generic matters. Look, I am all for AI, automation, ChatGPT, all those things to make your life easier however you can. It can't replace you. And if you try to let it replace you, then one of 2 things happens. Then you deserve to be replaced when it figures out how to replace you. Or you become irrelevant because you're saying stuff that anybody else who has a computer can say. So you got to make sure that you can put your own spin on things. And sometimes you can use that to create a script, but you need to be the person on camera reading the script. So, do I like you? Can you help me? Because most people, like the way that I view this is sales happen when somebody has a problem that they want solved. I mean, if you're hungry today at lunch, somebody will feed you for a certain amount of money. That's a problem that you have. It's not a massive problem, but it's a problem, right? So can you help me? Third is, will your program, your solution, will it work for me? That's where some of this social proof comes in, right? We need some evidence that it can work. And you as the spokesperson and owner, sure, you're going to say it can work. Can you show me some other evidence? That's why reviews matter so much with things. And then finally, what's the easiest way for me to get started and take the next step? I think those are things that we all need to address. And notice, I didn't say easiest means to be cheapest or shortest, but we want to reduce friction along that pipeline. We want to make it really easy for people to go from here to here to here to here. All right, so how do we implement this? Do your fundamentals, make sure you have those in place. Take an asset inventory. Look at the things that you already have that speak to the hot buttons of your clients. Map a 7 to 30-day hot button sequence, and it can be ideally that combination that I told you. Minimum of 1 ask beyond super signatures every 7 days. So, yes, the super signatures are offers, but they are offers that are usually secondary in the content. You need one thing that is the primary ask in that 7 days, right? So if I send out an email that's content and there's a PS, there's an offer, but it's I mean, it's a PS. It's, oh, by the way, we need one strong offer somewhere in that 7 days, and then deploy it, see how it works, tinker with it. Like if you can tell, hey, the videos or the audio or whatever got more engagement than the text, move them forward. Replace some of the text with more of the content that got more consumption. Figure out a way to automate what you can automate of it, but understand that it doesn't all need to be automated. Like the simplest way that there's a happy medium is, sure, we can have a playlist that I can automate and plug into our email sequence. That sounds like my kid every day, all day now. And
just need a cigarette.
But it's also really easy that if Amy's asking somebody what their biggest problem is, or if they reply to a sorting question with their biggest problem, we can say, oh man, we got this playlist of all of our, most popular marketing episodes. Here, I'll send that over to you. So now it doesn't have to be automated, right? And then duplicate it. If you've got more than one hot button, then duplicate that process for the next hot button. And once you get 3, you've probably done the 20% of the work that yields the 80% of the results. Yes?
2 questions. How am I figuring out my hot buttons? By emailing, I think you've had me do this before, to my list is, hey, what's more important to you? Weight loss, low back care, bone loss, whatever, or how am I finding the hot buttons?
I mean, what do people ask you the most stuff about? Like, some of this is better. I mean, surveys are wonderful and all that stuff, but I think that if you're just paying attention, you get the truth more than you get what people think they should say, right? Like, if you've repeatedly heard from people that, my back hurts, or I just struggle to stay on track with nutrition, then I don't think we're talking as much about just general, always like, oh, weight loss. I mean, that's an obvious one.
Right.
But why do they feel like they don't weigh what they want to weigh? Like, to me, that would be the hot button, right? Like, is it because I've tried every diet and failed, so it's yo-yo dieting? Is it hormones? Is it is it my spouse eats too much? I don't know.
It's all of those. And weight loss, I'd much rather deal with low back care and maintaining bone mineral density, because those are things that can be really targeted, which is weight loss, it's multifactorial.
But how many people come to you and say, I really want help with my bone mineral density?
They don't.
So that's not a hot button.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. The other thing is deploy it. Is that to our email nurture list, on Instagram, on Facebook, different avenues?
All the above. Okay. Yeah, I mean, deploy it first with the leads that you have to see. Like, I'm a big fan of test everything with your current database, because if the people that you've already got as leads are non-responsive, then one of 2 things. Like, you need to make this thing better, or you got the wrong leads. And that doesn't mean that a flood of them come through your door and buy, but if they're not engaging with it, if it's not interesting to them, then we got to do a little bit more investigation. Other questions?
On the, I think you said 8 to 12 texts and emails first 2 weeks. I'm not saying you're wrong by any stretch, but to me,
You can.
No, I just don't want to sound disrespectful. So that sounds like a shitload to me. So
It's like every other day. Like 8 is about every other day.
So what would the content be? Because I don't know if I could come up with 8 to 12 intelligent things to say. You know what I mean?
Then take like 4 intelligent things to say and 4 unintelligent things to say. Yeah, I mean, but like,
it's a combination of gives and
yeah,
asks. And
yeah. I mean, if you look at like the template that Doug shared with like new lead onboarding sequences, I think it's probably at the higher end of those numbers, I'm guessing.
Okay.
So, I mean, most of it's like every other day. But if you call, then an easy text is phone, hey, I just called and left you a voice message. If you get a chance, check it out. I mean, sending every other day emails, I think it shouldn't be super tough for you to piece that together, because if we're talking about 8, if you got 3 testimonials in there, that chews up 3 of them.
Right.
I mean,
It's like social proof, asks, gives.
yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it's, hey, these are 8 flagship pieces of content by any means. I think it's alternating and just having enough touch points. I mean, let's face it, this person engaged. Now, yes, we all get the people who say, well, I didn't opt in for that, or I didn't. But this person engaged, so they had some level of curiosity or interest, right? So we follow up on that. That's kind of a signal. We follow up on that, and then if they're not interested further than that, then we move them into just the automated stuff or the ongoing kind of broadcast stuff and move on.
Did you say, when you talk about using text from like a conversational standpoint, would you, like if you use Nominally, would you automate the initial like, hey, would you be interested in this? And then here's our structure for our follow-up. Like then you just take it personal and like, let's engage, let's figure out where the best direction to take them. Or like you said, you know, can we, whatever, like hear more about it? Can we, I have this offer, program, whatever, let's chat for 20 minutes or come in or whatever the next step would be?
I think that most conversation starters can be automated, right? Like they can be dropped into some sort of triggered sequence, or they can be all sent as a broadcast at a certain point. But for the responses, you want to pick up the conversation and actually have a conversation. Now, you can give people a script to adhere to or talking points to stay on task. But I think that in a world where more and more things are bots, if we want to maximize conversion, we need to demonstrate that this is a human pretty quickly.
That's the role playing instead of like going through those pieces we've done.
Yeah.
Can you do the same? You think you could do the same thing for like upsells with current clients? I mean, it seems obviously not necessarily bombarding them with a bunch of follow-up emails, but like.
Oh, I think that you could. Everything that starts a conversation can be triggered by an automated sequence or a broadcast.
Like, hey, we've had a bunch of people ask about needs recently. I put this together, and then piggyback that. Be like, wow, Pat, you know, I think you could get a lot more done if you came in 3 times a week.
And what's great about that is, like, let's say that you got 100 people, and 12 reply. Well, we focus all our effort on the 12, right? Like, we're not having to manually go for the 100. We just focus the conversations on the 12. It's much more manageable, and we're only talking to people who are interested.
Probably even piggyback that into something like a need workshop. If you had 12 people apply and say, hey, so we had some interest, would you guys have interest in spending a couple hours going through this, this, and this? We could do it for whatever minimal price, or we could use it as a lead builder and say, hey, if you have friends.
Yeah, I mean, I think that automation and leveraged outreach are both tools that should be used to create conversations. They shouldn't be tools to replace conversations. Yes.
So like going back to like a lead magnet, like using a survey. So let's say that I put something out there like, does this athlete need speed or strength? What is like the rhythm, and how do you combine it with like your front end offer, like lead form ads? Do you always run the like engagement in the background of that, or do you like take months off and run just engagement to warm up an audience, then try to hit them with like a lead form?
So are we talking about people who are already opted in?
No, not opted in.
I use the word lead magnet a lot. In my mind, there are like two lead magnets. They are things, a lead magnet is something we're giving, right? So it could be an asset that they can consume that is based on their desire to achieve a goal or solve a problem. A book, a guide, whatever. Or it can be an experience. It can be a 7-day trial. It can be a workshop. It can be something like that. The second one usually is a smaller group of people because there's a level of readiness that they have to feel that they're at to engage with that. But I alternate, like in my mind, I would alternate between those two. Now for a lead form, like if I'm filling out a lead form, what do I get in exchange for filling out the lead form? Is this to start a program?
Yeah, I mean, that was the question.
I don't think I would do that to a cold audience, but if you have a warm audience, people who've already watched videos, if people who've already engaged somehow online, I mean, I think you can run program-based things to a warm audience. I just think that it's not cost-effective to run program-based things to completely cold audiences. But I mean, if all you did was show a bunch of testimonial videos or case study videos from your athletes, and then you build up a warm audience of people who've watched pieces of those videos, and now we send that out, they know who you are. Yeah. And there's a bit of branding too, right? Like, that person's good. Like, so the place that Alex does a little bit of pitching, like pitching instruction at, they're based out of Lexington. They opened up a satellite location or a new location here in Louisville. Well, the pitcher who was the closer in the World Series, Walker Buehler, he had trained at the Louisville one at one point. Well, for the people here who don't know anything about this place because they've been in Lexington, it was probably pretty smart that they started running some videos and pictures of Walker Buehler associated with this organization because they were just borrowing his credibility. All of them knew the World Series, knew what was going on. So now, if I'm them, hey, the people who watched that little video, I'm retargeting them with something. So I've created a little bit of brand trust pretty fast. Oh, the guy who closed the World Series went there? It must be pretty good. So, you know, that's how I would be approaching it. Anybody else?
I think along that same line, so in your follow-up sequence, there was like we had 14 days, we were close to those numbers, I think, well, the thing we're not doing as much as the calls that we're changing, but adding in that engagement, like they haven't responded in those first 3 or 4, like within 24 hours of submitting the form, throwing in like that, hey, are you more interested in this, or this?
Yeah, I think that
that's a cool way to get some.
So my thinking on this is just very much shaped by how we would act if we, like, let's say that you want to, like, you go to Chipotle for lunch and you don't want to be creepy, but there's somebody standing in front of you for line, like in line. You would probably start the conversation with, hey, what's your name? Where are you from? Where you work? What are you getting to eat? Whatever. I don't know. What's good here? Not some long involved, like, hey, I got a van outside. But that's a big ask, right? So it, thank goodness we're on video, right? I don't have a van, so, but it's like, that's how conversations go. It's like small talk first. So get somebody to engage in small talk first, and then it gets like, there's always this like common ground or something that people find. You know, hey, I know somebody from there. I mean, think about, humans are really weird about this, but like I said, individuals, maybe not as predictable as a group. I mean, so if you're going to Louisville, somebody will say, And they're like, oh, I know somebody who lives there. As if there aren't 700,000 people who live there. There was not a bomb, there was an explosion.
Oh, okay.
There was, yes, a chemical plant exploded, or a chemical factory or something. So, like, they will find this, they're looking for any thread of connection they can find. Oh, I know somebody who's there. I went there once. You know, and I mean, and you'll hear it, and it's almost laughable, like, hey, I know somebody in Kentucky. Like, if I'm in another state, I'm like, you know, there are like 4.5 million people here. We probably don't know one another. And they're like, oh, wait a minute, they're my neighbor. And then you're like, oh, maybe I was wrong. But that's how people operate. So I think that we just have to try to stay congruent with the way that people normally operate if we want them to engage. So easy asks, small questions, common ground, being interested in them. These are all kind of tried and true ways to get somebody to move forward in a conversation. So if your whole conversation is come in for a consultation, that's none of those.
Yeah. I'm thinking like people that respond to a paid ad.
Yeah.
And like, I think, have you said before, you've got those that are, oh yeah, absolutely, I'm glad you reached out, it's quick to do, let's get scheduled. And the others, it's like, hey, I just said I was interested, I don't want to get married to that.
Well, so here, I'll give you this is like a pop quiz. Tell me all the websites you looked at yesterday.
ESPN.
It's one.
That's about it.
How many tabs do you have open right now?
So, Google,
Facebook. Engage. Is that right?
too many.
You didn't mention any of those.
I guess those are website.
They are, I promise. They have like the www in front of them and everything. So, like, I mean, I asked these people in workshop yesterday, how many tabs do you have open? And they're like, 20, 24, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, how many things happen in somebody's world that, like, we're not priority one. So just because they indicated an interest, they were curious, but that doesn't mean they're committed. So sometimes we got to warm the conversation back up a little bit. I mean, so all you have to think about, like, okay, what things did I look at? I can't tell you the number of things that I might have looked at yesterday. Thing I clicked on, if I'm waiting to pick up Alex at baseball or something, and I'm on my phone, versus what I look at on my computer, versus when I take him to this other place and I'm killing time doing. There's so many things that go across our feed that are in our screen. Like, so just because somebody filled out our form, and we get defensive about it, like, but you did this. I did so many things yesterday that I don't remember doing, and that doesn't bode well for me, I guess. But if it wasn't like the most important thing on their list yesterday, then it may not be like the top priority. So we may have to just say, cool, I got my foot in the door, but it's my job to drive the conversation forward here. Instead of, oh, they filled out this form and it was just some autofill thing that they can do like one click, and we're acting like, oh, well, they were ready to walk through the door today with a credit card in hand. Like, that's probably not how they were thinking. So just understand how people, like, I know I talk about this a lot, but if we actually observe how people actually operate, this workshop that I did for the Black Friday stuff yesterday, there were, I think, 14 people who responded, how many tabs do you have open? All but 3 had more than 10. So, and Melanie's looking over here like a furrowed brow thinking like, what are they thinking? But if that's the norm, right? Like that's the norm. Then we have to appreciate that any one of those 10 could be like the 10th most important, but it still got opened. So doesn't mean that you can't recapture their interest. They thought enough of it to open it. But that doesn't mean it's number 1 on the priority list or even number 3 or number 5. So you have to say, okay, it's my job. I have this opportunity now. It's my responsibility. Just like why I would tell you don't give somebody a business card and not get one back in return. That was something I figured out at the beginning of coaching baseball. Like not even business ownership. I'm like, man, I can give people a bunch of business cards. If I give out 500, I might get 5 people call me. But if I get 500 people's contact information, then I get to decide if there are 500 calls made. Same thing here. You get to decide if you want to move the relationship forward, and if so, we want to go with the most probable ways to get people to engage. Or we can just kind of, again, die on that hill of, well, they showed an interest. Well, they're not serious. I'm like, man, there's so many different things that might have caught their attention yesterday. If I got this much of their attention, I can still do something with it, and I can kind of fan the flames here and try to build it into something, even if it's not just this huge, huge interest. Anybody else?
Well, I got one more. On that same run up here, somebody in here do their own lead follow-up. Maybe you guys have someone else do the lead follow-up.
I do.
Do you know? Because what I found was like with I think for all of us, that context that they put in, it's now our responsibility. We have something that genuinely is going to help them improve their life, and they said they're interested. So we'll follow up till they're not. But for a team, I found the training is constantly going back to that. It's like, to your point, oh my gosh, I'm texting and calling so much. Listen, man, they've asked us for this. They've said they want this. So there's something that clicked in them. So it's your responsibility and privilege to continue to follow up to help them change their life in the way they want. But readiness is different than, or whatever. What did you use that other?
Qualified versus ready?
Qualified versus ready, yeah. Like they're just not on the readiness, they're not ready enough yet versus thinking qualified.
Yeah, we've talked at length, and this is kind of a Dean Jackson thing, like interested and ready are two different stages, right? One can become the other, but we can't. I've always thought of this very much like cueing an exercise. If you're cueing somebody to squat, you keep saying hips back, hips back, hips back, and nothing changes, then how about stop saying it and come up with a different thing to say? Right? If you're not eliciting the outcome that you want. Same thing here. Like, if you sent people 14 days of the same thing and it didn't work, that's your fault. 14 days is great. Send them different things to try to find the thing that works, right? So we want to have different ways to engage people. And if you have different ways to engage people, then you can meet them at different stages of this level of interest, right? Interested versus ready. I mean, there are, well, all of you could have an interest in something going on in your hometown this evening. Odds are you're not ready to participate. So, I mean, people can be interested in things that are not convenient for them right now, that, you know, might be great for them in December or January. But as a business owner, we can't put all our eggs in this, well, they filled out a form, so that means they're ready right this minute. I mean, it's great if they are, but the vast majority of people, that's not. There's curiosity, there's research. You could have been on your computer on a flight, and if you click on something local because you're interested in seeing what it is, and they're like, oh, wait a minute, that's Thursday, I'm not there.
That's good.
back to that point of follow-up, I just had a lady email me from back mid part of September. We've been following up from her since then. She said, hey, I'm ready to roll.
I had somebody from a year ago. Just the other day.
And obviously, I don't think, I mean, the number of people that are like, oh, I've been on your email list for 7 years, and I'm, you know, in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, you could have joined sooner. But yeah, I don't want to build my business model around a 7-year sales cycle, but there's something to be said for the, hey, we will continue to follow up with them. There's also this thing that we need to keep in mind. When you guys go out here to get lunch, if you go up past like the turn that goes in where like the little Mediterranean place is, and you get all the way to the stoplight, you will see there's a Planet Fitness on your left. Planet Fitness is spending a good amount of money, just like Orange Theory is spending like $34 a square foot to be next to Blaze Pizza and right behind Chick-fil-A. And let's say they've got 2,400 square feet. I don't know exactly what it is, but somebody could go in the light industrial park right behind where all these guys are, like right behind Target, and get that same 2,400 square feet for about $10 a square foot. So what that really means is they're paying $22 a square foot every month for the term of their lease to be seen, for brand awareness. So if you're not in a highly visible, like a visibly intrusive place where you're going to be seen if they're not looking for you, then more of this stuff matters to you, right? Like it matters a whole lot more that you're working to get seen and working to stay in front of people and working to differentiate. Because they're going to be seeing Planet Fitness and Orange Theory every time they go through Chick-fil-A. They're going to see them every time that they go to the liquor store. They're going to see them every time they go to Academy Sports. And we, as independent business owners, a lot of times don't have that. So that's great, because you figure they're paying this fixed amount for brand awareness for the term of their lease. So there's no variability to it. Oh, I can't pay a little bit less if ad costs go up during the election or something like that, or I can't change my marketing spend from this thing to that thing. But that's what we're competing against, is they're paying, in some cases, 3 times as much as people competing for that same client just to be seen. That doesn't even count their ad budget. So that's why I think follow-up matters more. That's why I think the branding stuff matters more. That's why I think BJ has done such a good job with ads for people who have individual, like independent businesses. Because the reason agencies, I think, can get away with that is they're like, well, hey, we've run for Anytime Fitness, or we've run for this or that. I'm like, yeah, those people who are being seen, even if you weren't running the ads, and you're just tacking something else on top of it. Well, if you're running ads for somebody who's not well-known and not being seen, how do you stand out? We good?
Are you still running like long form, short form content for the podcast, or is that something that you're?
It's incredibly random. We do both. Short form is probably more. I would like to tell you that it was, to make it bingeable and to make it a lot like the newsletters, but it's also like the thought of somebody listening to me talk, as long as you guys just listen to me talk here, every episode would probably be fingernails on the chalkboard to all of us. But I do think there's something to be said for short form, bingeable pieces of content, because that's how people consume videos, right? But I think long form is great if you're doing like interactive things, in like interviews with other people. But I think if you're just doing stuff, short form is probably a better option most of the time.
So if you're trying to, like, take Aaron and I, like, we put out an ad for this Rigsby program. It started at $10 a lead, it's at 14 now, it's just been killing it for us.
Yep.
We did it for Aaron's and it fell flat, right?
Mhm.
So it's like, how do you, so that's exactly what you're talking about, right? We need to get more like engagement in his area. How do you like duplicate and scale that if I were to have multiple licensees, like you have a playbook of like, hey, these are the type of engagement type?
Yeah, I think you have templates for videos that they need to create to get a lot of video views would be my first thing, like scripts, outlines, what they need to do to create social proof videos, and it's just kind of paint by numbers, almost like Mad Lib type stuff. They're like, okay, Aaron, you need to create these 5 pieces of content.
And Aaron, you need to run that for X amount of time before we even consider it.
Yeah, like we want to warm those people up and create market awareness before, before we go to cold traffic. There are exceptions to every rule, but I think in that case, yeah, like if we want to stay on that platform, and we want as much kind of grassroots support with that as possible. So we're going to ask our clients to go share stuff and like stuff and everything else to try to get some engagement with it.
So more of those like $1 a day kind of boost.
BJ talks about a 3-month runway. You really need a 3-month runway to, build up those warmer audiences. And video views are just a cheaper way to do that on the platforms right now. So using the content and then taking those video views and putting them into a separate audience. But he talks, because we're working together on a new project, and I want to be clear on, this group can be pretty patient with their ad performance, right? But some of our lower level folks, they want leads like tomorrow. And so just setting expectations that it's going to take a couple months to get a good audience warmed up before you start, getting a couple leads a day that are.
So you just to warm them up to then give them an offer.
I'm sure there's other stuff happening behind the scenes, but at a high level, yes.
These are informational interviews, not necessarily promoting a trial or a...
I think what we're talking about for ads aren't even interviews as much as they're pieces of content to create brand awareness and kind of pre-sale. And that's why I think it's important that if we compare it to an Orange Theory or somebody like that, how much more they're investing to be seen. But then what Doug just talked about, there are some people out here like, oh, I paid for things today, why don't I have 20 leads tomorrow? Tell that to the people who just signed a 10-year lease to commit to an extra, $9,000 a month. If you're not as committed as they are, then don't be mad if you don't get results that are like theirs, right? And so if you can't have a 2-month runway, then you probably need to be okay with not getting great results. And does that mean that that's the only way to get things? No, but I think that in this case, we want to build up awareness. We want, you've got plenty of content that you've created.
So some of them are awesome, right? Like a youth one we both ran. So if the speed one doesn't hit, that's indicative that he needs more brand awareness and speed in that area, but he's fine on the, okay.
Well, and then probably just more awareness with just in general to cast a wider net so you capture more people that might be interested in speed.
More results, more.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the two categories that probably have the highest ROI are certainly, you or your team speaking about pain points or hot buttons that your avatar, in your case, sports performance based stuff, but broadly speaking, 1, 2, 3 minute long videos on, here's a couple fixes for low back pain. So then somebody watches that, they're now, for that microsecond of time, listening to you about low back pain. But so it's education, and then, I don't know if he still does this with Josh, but part of our video strategy was video testimonials of the current clients that, again, had no offer on it. It was just check out Susan's story, and we knew that if you watched her story for any time, Facebook's got all the, whatever it is, categorizing audiences by a certain amount of seconds after they've watched it for a certain amount of time, and then you can pull them over. But I think social proof and then, the education piece are probably the two categories.
And I've heard Doug say this a lot, and I see it firsthand with what Alex does. He'll talk about in a small town or here Louisville may be a bigger town, but the part of town we live in, if I see somebody I know, the trust factor immediately increases some. So if you're showing social proof for your people, there's odds are, if they're successful, more people are going to know them. That's one of the things that I've seen with this organization that he's doing pitching stuff. They'll watch reels and stuff, and they'll just interview all the players that are in there. They'll ask them questions and hey, do you know who this pitcher is? Or what's your favorite this? Or what? And I will see him and his friend, they're scrolling through, hey, that's Ryan. And so there's a familiarity that comes with this that, if you've got some people that are doing well locally, put them out there. Oh, I didn't know he trained there.
That's probably where it's worth even throwing whatever extra sessions their way or things like that, especially with athletes, because there are some will be famous that you're oh, I didn't realize such and such trained there.
Oh, I've heard that from this pitching thing, because they're relatively new, so I keep kind of referencing that. They're actually subleasing in the baseball facility, the organization we've done stuff with for 12 or 13 years. And I've heard these kids saying, I didn't know he trained there at least a half dozen times, because they come in different time slot, whatever else. And I'm sure that validates.
I was going to say, we've had that amongst younger kids, even older kids, where they would walk in and they were oh, I didn't realize such and such trained here.
Oh, the big one, the World Series deal, right? Walker Buehler's, I didn't know you trained here. It might have been years ago, but there's credibility. I still get at least 2 or 3 clients a year based on my relationship with Eric Cressy, and I would say that from a business standpoint, he asks me a business question about once every 2 years. Now, we'll talk more than that, and there'll be conversations that aren't direct questions that maybe they benefit him business-wise. But, some of that, he wasn't asking me when they were doing a build out of another location in Florida, another building. Well, how many square feet should this be, or whatever else? It wasn't It's usually hey, I got this opportunity. What do you think of it? So it's not hands-on interactive coaching every other week, but there's some credibility for things that have been done earlier, which okay, we helped him at this stage, and these people are at this stage, so it's useful.